Around 5 years ago, I was here in Cornwall studying natural history photography full time and travelling around Cornwall to photograph the wildlife and landscapes that it had to offer. And now, 5 years later, I'm back again, and I thought it'd be really interesting to compare how I used to take images with how I now take images. Has the way that I use the camera, the way that I look at different elements in the scene and how I compose, have those things changed in 5 years? And have they changed enough to influence the output of my images? So how I'm going to do this is I'm not going to look at the old pictures, I'm just going to come to locations that I know I've shot at in the past, and I'm going to photograph them as I would any other day. And then I'll bring up the old pictures next to the new pictures and we'll see if things have changed. The first location that I've decided to come and reshoot is here on the Agnes coastline. And although I've spent today photographing the Cornish choughs because this is a really great location for that, I'm not actually here for the wildlife. I'm here for the landscapes, because this is one of the famous Cornish landscape photography spots. Wheal Coates. These old mine buildings and chimneys are a really common subject for landscape photographers around Cornwall, especially Wheal Coates. It must have been photographed from every possible angle. But we don't really have much to work with today. The lighting is really flat. There's no point in waiting till sunset because the clouds are right down to the horizon, and it's a little bit too late in the year for all the colourful flowers to be out amongst the heather. So when I first arrived and I went to where I'd shot from before, I knew I wasn't going to go super wide because there just isn't the colour, the drama, anything happening in the clouds. You don't need to shoot wide when there's nothing in the further landscape worth shooting. When you're composing an image, what you choose to include and exclude is how you tell a story. What's in the picture is the narrative. So when I first got here and I headed to the side, which is the obvious place to shoot from, the things I was trying to include was the path that leads down to the building, the heather and the remnants of colour that were here, and the coast, the proximity to the ocean and the vastness of the ocean beyond the building. By taking a walk around the building and finding this vantage point, I can include all the things I wanted to include to tell the story of this building, but I can do it in a much simpler form factor, a much simpler composition. So here's the frame I'm working with, and I'm going to be moving around within about a metre squared, because with that amount of movement, the building's relationship to the background and the scene as a whole isn't really going to change, but the path, because it's right near the lens, is going to change a lot. Here's what happens if I start off up high. You can see the path is quite wide, it's quite dominating in the foreground. I really only want it to bring the viewer's eye up to the building. I don't really want there to be that much detail and anything to really look at there. As I drop down and include the heather in the foreground, the path is still there, but it's become much thinner. And it's also started to enter from the left of the frame rather than the centre of the frame. But I think overall this composition is going to be my favourite, with the path coming in from the left slightly, quite thin because the camera's low down, and the foreground is taken up with a lot of out of focus rich greens and specks of purple and pink from the heather, which is going to work really well to liven up an image which is really quite plain and simple and bland in some ways. And so now that we've got that shot, let's bring up the shot that I took 5 years ago. I know that it was taken from over there, but I can't remember the time of day or really anything about the scene. So it'll be quite interesting to see how that image compares to what I found 5 years later, because I took a bit more time to explore the scene and I think I'm probably using the foreground more actively than I was then. Okay. The reason I find this project so interesting is that in these 5 years I won't really have changed the technical side of my photography. How I choose my aperture and which shutter speed to use, those things are tools and they won't really change. But the way that I view a scene and the elements within a composition and how I want to balance a frame and the overall feel that I want in the image, those things will change with time. Basically, all photographers have a progression, and that progression isn't necessarily forwards, it could be sidewards. Photographing vast landscapes and powerful sunsets may get you a lot of likes and shares on social media, and it's often what gets people interested in landscape photography in the first place. But you may find that your tastes change over time, and they don't always follow what gets more likes when you post the picture. I'm here at the Cot Valley right now, which is full of these amazing large boulders, and that's what I'm choosing to focus on today, the boulders and the motion of the water. I'm forgetting about the rest of the landscape and focusing on the elements which help to create the rest of the landscape, and I think it's working really nicely. I'll bring up the shot now, which was taken about 5 years ago, and I really like this landscape, so I'm not expecting this 5 years later image to exceed the one I already have, but it's certainly a different approach to the same landscape. My last location for this video is another one of Cornwall's most famous landscape spots. I've been here to Botallack Mines 3 or 4 times in the past, but I don't think I've ever been here on an evening that's shaping up to be as nice as this one. There's some high altitude clouds up above the mine buildings, which should light up 5 or 10 minutes after the sunset, in which case I'm going to be doing a vertical panorama leading right from the crashing waves down the bottom up to the colourful clouds. To continue with what I was saying at the last location about what changes over time, I wanted to look at other photographers' work, and so I turned to the most famous landscape photographer, Ansel Adams, and I had a look at his archive. And what I found was that before about the mid-1930s, a lot of his images were what you might call studies of his subjects. They were very intimate close-up shots of pretty much nothing but the subject. And then after that he progressed into showing those subjects but within a larger scene, which is arguably his most famous and his best work. And I don't imagine he went straight from shooting one way to immediately shooting another way. There was no doubt a gradual change over time, and the change could be due to the people he met, the places he went, the ideas he was thinking, the way he was feeling, and overall what he wanted to portray with his images. So change is a really good thing. Maybe we should be looking for signs of change within our own work, and if we find them, maybe lean into it, because you never know what images those changes could lead to. Okay, so let's bring up an image from about 5 years ago and then compare that to what I've taken today. Well, that's everything for this video. If you liked it, feel free to let me know in the comments, and also let me know how you thought the comparisons went between my images 5 years ago and now what I'm taking today. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.